Happy Hour for October 3rd. I've got Ken Kazak with me, and we are going to have a great conversation with Vietnam Marine and best-selling author Jack McLean. We're just waiting a couple minutes for Jack to get back. We would not want to start without him, but we might have to. So actually, why don't we start without? Oh, there he is. Jack is back. Oh, right.
I'm really sorry. I was cooking bacon that was going to be due, and then before you called me to come on early, so now it's out of the oven, and I'm
all
clean.
Right.
My wife will be home; she can take care of the rest.
Very good. I'm going to start the music and let people in. Everybody, and welcome to our VBC Happy Hour, our first one of October 2022. I am Todd DiPastino, and I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we're a nonprofit that has been around since 2008, holding events like this, mostly in person, where veterans come and share their stories with the public. And as you know, I'm not a veteran. If you've been to one of our events before, you know that I'm not a veteran. I'm looking around here in the Zoom room, and I see many of us here aren't veterans. We come to be educated and to be inspired. And I think veterans come, to connect maybe, and to heal. I've discovered that there's a healing quality to sharing your story. And so I used to think that, I was just the only one getting something out of this arrangement, but it turns out the veterans enjoy it too. And over the past 14 years, we've heard thousands of stories from thousands of veterans. And tonight we're going to hear one from one of 400,000 Marines who served in Vietnam. He's just one of 400,000 Marines, Jack McLean. But as far as I know, he's the only Marine who graduated from Phillips Academy, Andover, to serve in Vietnam. And then he went on to Harvard University. And I think the central theme of his wonderful memoir here called Loon, a Marine story, is that kids like Jack did not go to Vietnam. And that was one of the, I think, tragedies of that war. So Jack's going to share his story. Jack is joining us from Long Island. How are you doing, Jack?
I couldn't be better. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
It's a great group we have. And I think we're going to get a lot of interesting questions and comments. With me is Ken Kazak. Many people know Ken. He's been with us for a long time. He's a writer himself. He has read and enjoyed Jack's book and has questions, especially about the writing process. Ken is a writing coach and has always been one of these people who encourages veterans to write their stories. I encourage them to share their stories. Ken focuses on the writing part. Ken, you read Loon?
No, I digested it. It's that easy of a read. It's that easy of a page turner, and there's so many things in there that stuck with me, which I'll bring up later. But it's an excellent book. It's an excellent book.
It's an excellent book, and I told Ken that this is the first time I never read sections out of books, but this book inspired me to want to do that. There are just some sections I would like to read out and discuss. But before we get to that, let me again say that I am Todd DiPastino. I'm the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit based here in Pittsburgh, PA, and our whole mission is really to create this community of listening around veterans and their stories. And we've been doing it for the past 14 years. In 2020, we took our programming online, which allows us to get people like Jack McLean on. And so we continue to do online and in-person programming. And we actually have, I'm going to start my, here, I'm going to share my screen is what I'm trying to say. As you can see, I am flying solo here so far. We have an event coming up on Wednesday, an in-person event in Beaver County. If you live here in Western Pennsylvania, would love to have you join us. These are veteran storytelling events, and that this, as you can see from this picture here that I chose to highlight or to publicize this event, the special thing about this event in Beaver County during the school year is we always get 50 to 60 sixth graders from Dutch Ridge Elementary School come, and they come prepared, man. Those teachers prepare these kids. They come to the program, they come to the breakfast, they sit and scatter among the room. They don't just sit with themselves, they sit with the veterans, and they have a checklist of questions that they ask veterans. And then 5 or 6 brave students stand up and they read a question that they have for the room. So, this kid might be asking about what was the food like? And I'm sure Jack will say the food was fantastic.
Food?
And, were you ever scared? What medals did you get? Were you homesick? That kind of stuff that I think a lot of us have questions about. A lot of us who haven't served have questions about, but kind of don't know how to ask. So we make the kids ask it, and so that we're not embarrassed by it. So this is a breakfast. Do join us. We usually get about 150 people at this event. And it's one of our nicer venues at Seven Oaks Country Club in Beaver, and that'll be on Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. The program starts at 9 o'clock, and then we go do storytelling for 90 minutes. It's absolutely wonderful and a heck of a lot of fun. Here, I'm going to I see a Vietnam Marine wanting to come in. All right. And then, I was going to say, Warren Goss, he just called and said that he's going to be there. Warren landed on Utah Beach on D-Day, June 6, 1944, fought his way all the way through to the end of the war in Germany. He will be there on hand. And Harry Van Riper will also be there. And I'm going to be telling Harry that he's going to be our cover story of our next VBC magazine, because he has an extraordinary Vietnam story that I want to share. Week from tonight, our next program, our next VBC Happy Hour is going to be the SS Mayaguez incident. If you are a Vietnam veteran, you might remember the Mayaguez. It's considered the last battle of the Vietnam War. It's an odd thing that happened after the fall of Saigon, where the Khmer Rouge, a patrol boat run by the Khmer Rouge Navy, the Cambodian revolutionaries, captured a container ship and 40 crew members and held them as hostage. And then the Marine Corps was sent in and for a rescue attempt. And it's a kind of a complicated story. The Khmer Rouge released the hostages, but there were 40, 41, 43, maybe killed in action, Americans killed in action. Most of the Marines who were sent to rescue these hostages. Those are the last 41 names on the wall, the Vietnam War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. So we're going to have some veterans, some Marines who were on that mission joining us a week from tonight, October 10th at 7 p.m. Please do join us if you can. And also, you all know that we publish a quarterly magazine because I'm a writer and I love to write the stories that we hear. And we write it up in a quarterly magazine called VBC Magazine. And our new issue was just dropped off on my front porch, blocking my entrance into the house. 2,500 copies of this magazine were delivered. As you can see, the wonderful Sandy Ortega, the first Black female Air Force officer. She is our cover story. She has joined us before. And the other thing I want to just emphasize is I think the special thing about this issue is this article here. And Henry Shepke is responsible for it. Henry, you're with us here this evening.
Wow.
How are you? Oh, Henry, do you know what? I think I need to ask you to unmute. Here you go. I'm not letting people unmute themselves.
Hi,
Hey.
how are you doing, Todd?
Good. How are you, Henry? I just want to let
Pretty
people
good.
know that Henry, as you know, if you've joined our events before, you've met Henry. He's from Madison, Wisconsin. He's a high school student, and he has made it among his missions to write thank you notes to World War II veterans. You're well over 300 thank you notes, haven't you?
Yeah.
Well over
Yeah, and
300.
Henry, I want you to know that I have personally been to Corregidor. And when I was 16, I had the opportunity to get a tour of Corregidor, and it has stuck with me like nothing else for the rest of my life.
Wow.
Wow, when you were 16.
Yeah, I was still in Andover.
What'd your grandfather have to say about that? By the way, your grandfather was wonderful.
Oh,
Your grandfather, he's the hero of the book.
yeah, I think as it turned out, I mean, he may be.
Yeah. Okay. But Henry, one of the veterans that Henry wrote was this 102-year-old Paul Kircham, and wrote him a thank you note. And Paul wrote him back a 17-page handwritten letter
Wow.
containing his story of surviving the Bataan Death March.
Wow.
And not only that, but surviving it and then going back to Japan to live when he was later with the Air Force. Just a wonderful story. Henry, you very kindly asked Paul if it would be okay if we publish his letter, and which we did. We're doing for our next issue here. So, and this is a magazine that we send free of charge to anybody who wants it. We send out about 7,700 copies, and anybody who wants it can get it. So if you don't get it, it's because we don't have your address. So please do give us your address. And then the last two announcements I want to make is just, I want to thank D&D Auto Salvage and Metal Recycling for sponsoring this event, as they do so many of our events. They are a 50-year-old junkyard here in Western Pennsylvania. Actually, they have two locations, one in Lawrenceville, one in Tarentum, and they are a metal recycling facility. And you could find out more about what they do and the services they offer at dndautosalvage.com. That's dndautosalvage.com. And tobacco-free Adagio Health has also re-upped their sponsorship of our events. We're very thrilled about that because they are a nonprofit that focuses on women and families' health, but they have this line of tobacco use. They want to cut down the use of tobacco in America, and they want to also encourage healthier places to work, live, and play, and to educate Americans about tobacco use. And they know that veterans use tobacco more than the general population. Let me ask you, Jack, did you smoke when you were in the Marine Corps?
I did. I smoked for 25 years, and then I quit for 15 years, and I started, and then I quit again. But I haven't smoked for 10 years.
But did you smoke before you entered the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I started smoking when I was 13.
When you were 13 years old, that's about like Bill Malden was doing this.
I'll tell you a funny story, if I may. When we were at boot camp, we were somebody was caught smoking. I was at Paris Island. Somebody was caught smoking, like in the first or second day. This is probably all part of the drill, and they said you can't have any cigarettes anymore. So 2 or 3 months later, whenever it was we graduated, the drill instructor had us all stand around the wash basins, and they passed out. One of the privates passed out Pell-Mell cigarettes. They had several packs of Pell-Mells. They passed them out to the whole platoon. Another private went around and lit every one of them. And I'm sure there are kids in that platoon who never touched a cigarette, who 40 years later died of lung cancer, probably, because that was their first introduction to it. But it's how prevalent cigarettes were, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of my beloved neighbor, 90 or 89-year-old Marshall Gordon, said that he learned to smoke in the Army because he was ordered to in basic training.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. This is Rick Arisman was about 12 years old. Oh, this is like true confessions here on BBC Happy Hour.
I haven't told that in a long time.
All right. So we want to just thank our sponsors and thank all of you for joining us. I am keeping everybody muted here so we don't get clutter and so that we don't get disturbed by Zoom bombers. But if you would like to unmute, just let me know. Put it in the chat, raise your hand. As you know, we just love to have a free form conversation here. And this conversation tonight is with Jack. And Jack is the author of this book. And I just want to emphasize how wonderful this book is. And it stuns me that it's his first book. And as far as I know, Jack, this is your only book?
Yeah, the second one is with my agent, but it's not published yet. It's about veterans. About me being, it's a follow-on. It's about being a veteran. This is just about the 2 years between my graduation from prep school and my enrollment in college, and one of which was Vietnam. Some people here might not be familiar with what Phillips Academy is. And in fact, I'm not that familiar with it. I always get it confused with Phillips Exeter Academy. And it turns out they're two different places. One's in Exeter, New Hampshire, one's in Andover,
Massachusetts. You went to this one, Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, one of the oldest schools in the nation, usually considered the best school in the nation, one of the most exclusive private schools in the nation. Are you the only graduate of that school who served in Vietnam?
No, there were probably others. I was unique in that I don't think anybody. I enlisted in the March of my senior year before my spring term, and I did it because I wasn't doing all that well academically, and I just was sort of tired of being educated. I wanted, your kids these days would call it a gap year,
Yeah.
But it was, as so many of you remember, it was 1966 and there was a draft. So you could take a gap year, but your gap year would ultimately be in the military. And I decided to, I went and sort of investigated the possibilities when I was home on, I was going to say leave, on vacation, on break. And the Marine Corps right at that time sort of had a 2-year program. And I thought, well, what could possibly go wrong? And so I enlisted with the idea that I'd go in after graduation in the summer of 1966. And I thought that I'd probably get duty, as an embassy guard in London, and that the war would be over. I just didn't think of it as being that big a thing. Nobody, I can tell you, I was the only person to enlist in the military out of Andover probably since George Bush won. Actually, he didn't even do it. He went to Yale, and then went in to in the service during World War II. I was there. I spent 3 years with George Bush II, who was a year ahead of me, and we talk about that another time. But it was. But certainly I was the first person to go. 50 kids from my class went to Harvard, directly to Harvard. So it was unique. Yes.
It was unique. And I mean, you might not have known where Vietnam was in 1966, but other people did, like I'm assuming your parents. What did they have to say when you let them know that you weren't going to go directly to college, that you were going to enter the military?
They were, when the idea first came up, I was home for a couple of weeks during spring break. When the idea first came up, I'd gotten rejected from a college I'd wanted to go to. And Andover had a lot of clout. They could have got me in into a lot of colleges if I'd wanted to go to college. But I thought it was sort of unfair. I'd applied to college, I got turned down. And so I talked about it, and the idea came up, and they sort of bit their tongues and say, well, you should pursue the idea and look into it, and things that parents would say. And so I did. I was living in Boston at the time. I went downtown, went to all the recruiting places, and I came back and said, well, there's, the Army's too long, the Air Force is 4 years, the Navy's 4 years, and forget the Coast Guard or the National Guard. You couldn't get near them in 1966. The Bushes had taken all those slots. And but I said, but they said, why don't you come back? But the Marine Corps had this program, and they said, why don't you come back before you go back to school and get a physical, no obligation. And and then when you get back, you can talk to your parents and talk to your teachers and make a good decision, make a practical decision. So I went, my parents let me just watch me go through this, and as a child, as you would a child, And I went down a few days later, and I took the physical, I passed, and we were on our way back to the Boston Army, from the Boston Army base to the customs house in Boston, where the recruit thing was. He basically looked at me. There were 6 kids in the car, and every one of them enlisted on the spot. And he looked at me and said, "What about you?" And I thought, well, geez, I seem like sort of a loser, if I don't. But I had no idea that I would. And he said some of the most significant words to me I'd ever heard, which was like, which was like, what fucking choice do you have? And I just sort of did the math really quick, and I thought, no, I mean, I don't want to go to college for the sake of going to college. I mean, yes, I could, but my parents had served. I thought it was an honorable thing. I certainly didn't want to go to war, but I said, okay. And I went home, and my parents were, I mean, my mother was, I don't have to tell you what my mother was like. And my father was sort of stoic because that was his attitude, but it was not a, I didn't know anybody who was in, not only in Vietnam, I didn't know anybody who was in the military, and I didn't know anybody who knew anybody who was in the military. I mean, that's how remote it was for me.
Can I ask you on the other end? I know this is jumping way ahead. I know that you have 3 daughters.
Right.
If your daughter came to you and said, Dad, I'm going to join the Marine Corps, what would you have felt? Or what would you have said?
Well, nobody's ever asked me that question before, Todd. Well, I would have had to, I certainly would have, would have admired her decision and supported her decision. And I would have assumed that, knowing my 3 daughters, coming from the different places they might have come from, that they would have had good reason to want to do that. I would hope that they weren't doing it because their father had been in the Marine Corps. I mean, I would hope desperately that they weren't doing that. But I would hope that there was something that they might have seen that, that as so many of you, I'm just a strong advocate of service to your country. And if that's the service that they thought was where at that tender age they could best serve, then I would support them. But man, I'm just, as I said to I'm just glad I didn't have any boys.
Because I have 2 daughters too, and I, as much as I love veterans, and I love our the effect that military service has had on so many of the veterans that I've met over the years, but it would make me nervous. Are you sure you know what you're getting into?
Yeah.
You might be getting into harm's way. Just as a parent, I think.
I didn't give my parents that choice when
no.
I don't think they ever believed that I would enlist. And when I did enlist, I didn't tell them. I mean, I told them after I had enlisted, when they
After
already
the
had me.
fact.
So it was, they sort of had to ride with the tide after that, which they did. I mean, which they did with great pride and great, reading the book. I mean, it was just a great pride.
You took to boot camp in a sense, right? I mean, nobody likes boot camp, but you jumped into it with gusto, correct?
Yeah,
No?
I guess I never really thought about it that way. But I knew what was coming. I mean, I wasn't naive. I mean, I had enough people telling me what Parris Island, South Carolina was like. So there were no real surprises. I knew all the way when we were being harassed for different things that I could logically process that it was nothing that we had done necessarily, that it was just part of the process. It didn't make it any less difficult. It didn't make it any less horrific in a lot of occasions, as you would see reading this book. But I can safely say that having graduated from Andover, having graduated from Harvard, that far and away, but for perhaps the birth of my first daughter, graduating from Parris Island boot camp, Marine Corps boot camp, was the proudest moment of my life to this day.
And you absolutely say that. And it brought me to tears when I read it. You say, graduation day was the proudest day of my life.
Yeah, still is.
Mom, Dad, and Barbie, your sister, came down from Boston and were rendered nearly speechless by the whole scene. Imagine this. Imagine a family being exposed to this wondrous ceremony that they have for boot camp graduation. Nothing in their lives or experience could possibly have prepared them for this. Throughout Parris Island, thousands of identically clad boys of all backgrounds, heights, and colors were marching in unison, now components of tightly disciplined units. There was the omnipresent cadence of boots on pavement and hands on rifles. The platoons moved forward and then sideways and then to the rear, while moving their weapons from one shoulder to the other. The precision was mesmerizing. My mother loved the poetic swagger of the drill instructors and was most admiring as she watched the drilling recruit platoons pass by. She particularly enjoyed the singing cadence. The drill instructor would sing out a line to the cadence, each beat synchronized to the left, right, left of the boot striking the parade deck. Then we would respond in unison. One Marine Corps color is gold, shows the rest of the world we are bold. Right, or left, right, left, left, right, left. Mother was less enamored with the next cadence that she heard. Another Marine Corps color is red, represents the blood we shed. Left, right, left, left, right, left. I think it's just such a, you describe it beautifully. You could feel the pride welling up. Jack, okay, what are you gonna say?
No, I was, it turned out to be a, turning to writing, just a theme that I came upon later when I was in C-130 going from Da Nang to Phu-Bai to join Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines. And I was looking at, our backs are against the bulkhead, and I'm looking at the people that are in with me, and some are guys coming back from R&R, some are guys coming back from being wounded, some are guys like me that have fresh, green uniforms on. And I'm not scared, but I'm paying attention, and I start singing that cadence to myself. 3076, which was our platoon. We're the best of all the rest. Left, right, left, left, right, left. And I said, I hope I remembered half of what Sergeant Hilton told me, because that was where, this is where it came alive. This is where all the bullshit of boot camp, the perceived bullshit of boot camp and all the harassment and all this came down to this. And you just I was stretching my mind to try to remember every little detail that I had learned, because I knew that my life was going to be on edge for the next year.
I see we have a World War II Marine here with us, Jack Morrow. Jack. Good to see you.
God bless.
Don Nemchek, you just asked in the chat a great question. I'm asking you to unmute. Could you ask Jack the question that you had?
I sure will, Todd. Jack, I read your book and I couldn't put it down. I'm an old sailor from back in the day, and I certainly am proud of the Marines. I honor them. I served with them, and this old soul salute you. But Jack, here's my question, buddy. Did the drill instructors down at Parris Island hassle you more because you were educated more than some of the other recruits? Oftentimes, we all know that they would try to pick on someone for a particular reason. I have a McKeesport story. Well, I have a hometown story about one of my buddies who is in the Marine Corps, but I'd like to hear you answer that question.
Don, that's actually a very good question. And I don't think I've ever spoken about it before. I don't think that there was a drill. I never had a drill instructor who knew what Andover was. And there's no way they would know about it. And I certainly wasn't volunteering it, but they did know. My family was from Brookline, Massachusetts, and Brookline, wasn't like, some, Everett, Massachusetts. I mean, it was a tonier suburb. And so one of them sort of knew what Brookline was. So they used to wheedle me about like being a rich kid or something, which I wasn't necessarily, but that was their thing. But academically, no, it never, that part never came up. It did with some kids. But happily not with me. I did at 6'3", I did every single thing I could do to look 4'2" for 13 weeks. And for the most part, except for a few weeks, as you will see, I succeeded.
I asked Sharon George to unmute because her wonderful father, who passed away, was it earlier this year, Sharon, or was it last year?
It was in 2021.
2021, was a Marine in the 1950s, and he was a Harvard graduate.
Oh, God
And
bless
man,
him.
yeah. When
Semper
his
Fi.
drill instructor found out that he was a Harvard graduate,
Oh,
Sharon, Sharon, how did the drill instructor find out?
Well, at that time, he had left Harvard and you had to go into one of the forces. So he had belonged to the Hasty Pudding Club at Harvard, and his mail was being forwarded to where he was. And they would come out and call your mail and you come up and get it.
Oh, God. I know just the scene.
Well, at the end, the sergeant held up, he said, "Private George, I got mail for you, but you have to come to my office to get it." And that's how they would talk to you all the time. So my dad walks in and there's several of them in there and they're just laughing and laughing. And he throws the envelope down. And he says, "What is that, Private George?" And my father keeps hemming and hawing, trying not to tell him what it is. He was like, "I want to belong to that club. Can I belong to that club?" "I don't know the answer to that question, sir." "Yes, you do, Private George. What do you think? I'm not good enough to belong to this club? What is wrong with you, Private George?" And on and on and on. So finally he says, "Private George, I want to know now why you belong to this club." And he goes, "Are you a Harvard boy?" And
Oh,
my
boy.
father says, "Sir." And he says, "Private George, so I've had a lot of Pennsylvania coal miners here, and I've had a lot of Harvard boys like you, but I have never had the combination in one ugly son of a bitch like you." And he threw the letter out and said, "Get the hell out of here."
It's not even funny. It's fact. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's,
Oh, yeah.
it is.
And you had a complicated relationship with your drill instructor, with Staff Sergeant Hilton, right?
Did I ever?
Yeah. Can you talk about what happened with him?
I wrote a lot of letters home. I based my book off 102 letters home that I wrote from the time I was in the Marine Corps, that my mother, bless her heart, had saved. But anything that I had a history teacher from Andover who was very dear to me, and I felt free to tell him a little bit more of what was going on. And I told him about being beaten one day, and or several days, and it wasn't an uncommon event back then. I hope it is now. And he was a very, he was an Andover teacher, and he was and he was really concerned about this student of his. And he called a buddy of his who he'd known from college. He'd coincidentally gone to Harvard as well, and who was at that point a major in the Marine Corps in the Pentagon. And he said, "I just want to, I just got this letter from this kid who was in my class last year, and here's what he's talking about. He's talking about beaten up by a drill instructor." And I thought all that stuff sort of went away in the 50s, and I'm not sure what to say. And I don't want you to say anything. I don't want you to get in any trouble. I just want to make sure that everything is sort of okay. And from the second that this guy heard that, he was, if not legally, certainly militarily obligated to pass it up the chain of command. He had no choice. He couldn't just, it wasn't two classmates talking anymore. It was him, a major in the Marine Corps. Having heard this, he had to pass it up the chain of command. And 3 days later, I was called in to sit in front of 4 or 5 people in the commanding officers area. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what I'd been there for 3 weeks. I didn't know what if they were sergeants or off. I didn't know what they were, but I knew that it was as serious as a hand grenade. And they said, "Were you?" And they, sort of faced me with it. They said, "We got this." And I didn't know why I was there. I didn't know what it was. And then they said, "Have you ever?" And I denied. And they said, "Are you familiar with this guy?" And they said his name. And I said, "Oh, fuck, it's the letter." And And they said, so tell us, have you ever been beaten? Have you ever been hit? And I was stuck, you know, I mean, if I said yes, I was either out of the Marine Corps or certainly out of Charlie Company and probably held back a couple of weeks. And if I said no, I was lying, which was against everything that was everything. And so I lied and said no. And when I came back to it was the only time I'd ever walked alone. I had to walk across the parade deck by myself. I walked back to the barracks and he called me in and he sat me down. He closed the door and said, "What did you tell him?" And I said, "I told them no." And he said, "Tell me exactly what you tell them. What did this guy say? What did that guy say? And what did they have on their collars? You know, what kind of things they have on their collars?" And what they said, what came back was they said, "Well, basically you're a liar and you got to write your teacher and tell him you're a liar and that none of this happened here and deny the whole thing." And I said, "Okie dokie. And we want to see the letter before it goes out." And that was that. It was a horrific moment for me. It was a earth-shattering moment for my teacher, who just was, obviously shattered that he that he had put me in that position, or that his friend hadn't betrayed him. His friend was, doing what he had to do. He's reporting it up the chain of command. When I had years later, many years later, when I wrote the book, 2009, I was going to my first book event and it was up near Andover. And I asked he and his wife to come. And I had not told him that he was in the book. And I just didn't know how to tell him that I'd used him basically as part of a morality play, which Todd, goes on like throughout the book or the early part of the book. And so I told him that I'd used that and hoped it was okay, and I'd sent him a copy of the galley before I'd seen him before this book event, main early book event. And he was stunned in a good way. And as he left, he turned around and said, "Jack, where the hell did you ever learn to write?" I sure as hell never could write with him. And I said, "I thought you taught me." But it was the greatest compliment he ever gave me. I was 20 years later, I was with him when he died. It was a wonderful experience. Wonderful man in my life.
We have a Marine drill sergeant with us, Carl Curtis. Hey, Carl. Yes, we do. Carl, how many years?
They're not drill sergeant.
Can you say that again?
Drill instructor, not drill sergeant.
There you
How
go.
did I get that wrong? Drill instructor. I'm sorry about that, Carl. Carl, how many years in the Marine Corps for you?
20.
20 years. And you
dear.
probably saw a lot of changes in the Marine Corps. And we got to ask, did you lay hand on Marines?
Yes, not to injure, but yeah, to get their attention. Not grab them by the throat or nothing like that, but no, the bill of your cover accidentally hit you at the bridge of the nose because the recruit moved, not because I hit him with it. The recruit moved, and
What years were you there?
When was I there?
Yeah.
I was there January of 92 to July 94, and then I was there from 02 to 04 as a first sergeant.
They probably cleaned things up a bit by then, but
Paris Island changes over the course of 3 years dramatically. It changes constantly, and every 3 years it completely changes because the first sergeants come in, and now they're running things the way it was when they were drill instructors. And so then the next group comes in and they change it and they do things the way when they were drill instructors, which always change from class to class as you go through Paris Island.
Carl, you know me long enough to know that I ask stupid questions. Could you say succinctly for our group here what your mission is as a drill instructor at Parris Island? What are you doing to these young men who come in?
Well, our mission was to take a civilian and make him a Marine. And one of the things I used to tell the recruits as a first sergeant, that they need to realize that in this profession, success means you live and failure means you die. And the drill instructor, and a recruit, a Marine knows, because you're in there, and obviously you hate your drill instructor. And my mission was always to be the most hated drill instructor going into the rifle range, because during the rifle range, the transition occurs and that hatred turned into respect. And recruits begin to realize that you spend more time with them than you do with your own family. They see you more than your own family does. And once that maturity starts to occur, and it typically starts transitioning during the rifle range period, because the drill instructors are there, but they're not with the recruits all day. The PMI is, and so there's some more time away. However, they like their senior drill instructor because he's the nice guy to them. But that respect goes more toward those other drill instructors, because they realize that you're the ones that taught them. And I can tell you that I go to Florida every winter, and I have a guy who comes from Iowa with his family, who was one of my recruits in 1992. And there's another former recruit that lives right off the base where I go, and we go over and have oyster roasts, and it's just funny to me. I sit back and watch, because they admire you, like you're some superhuman. Like, to me, I'm just, you were just another recruit, and I was just doing my job. And but the drill instructors leave that impact, and part of it is, they know, leave that lasting impression that you'll never ever forget me. And that was my mission as a drill instructor, to leave that impact on them, so that they always remembered me. And I get Facebook messages and texts, and
that's so great,
that always come back and comment about that.
And Jack, you say the lessons of Parris Island were incalculable, and I have no doubt that they saved my life time and again while I was under enemy fire in Vietnam. How did the lessons save your life, you think?
It's interesting from a writing standpoint. It was a question that my editor asked me when I was writing the book, and they said, well, all the stuff about Parris Island is really good, and it's really this, but how does it connect with the rest? I mean, what did you learn? And I'd never thought of, I never thought about it before. And I think it was, certainly the discipline, the close order drill, the tear you down to build you up, the pride that comes off those weeks at the range, and that what you carry into where you go when you go into combat. And I think that people ask me if drugs were sort of prevalent in Vietnam, certainly in the later years. And so they say, well, what were drugs like? And I say, well, maybe a couple of guys smoked pot, but nothing else. I mean, there's nothing. And there was nothing in the Marine Corps. I mean, it was part of it was we were miles away from any place where anybody could get anything in the first place. But there was just not, everybody was there for everybody else. And it just wasn't, it wasn't anything. It was a real, and that's Parris Island. I mean, Parris Island is, incalculable. It's really incalculable. And I disagree a little bit with your comment that how much it's changed. My wife and I have been down several times. I went down for a graduation in oh, 7 or 8 years ago. My wife and I have been down a couple of times since, and I think it is, given modern day things, I think it's largely the same. I think that Paris Island, for what it gives with certain changes to adapt to society and things, is largely changed since the 30s or the 40s. I mean, it's they don't beat people up, they don't march them into swamps anymore, but it is, as I think, as physically and emotionally tough probably as it ever was.
Yeah. Thomas Gurneau, hey, Thomas, how are you?
Good. Thanks a lot for everything that you and Ken do. It's quite an honor to be, talking to you, Ken. You guys do amazing things, and just always fascinated by the guests that you get. And Jack, we were at a reunion a couple weeks ago down in North Carolina.
Good to see you, Tom.
Good to see you, Jack. And I think what strikes me about Jack is like the cover of the book. For those that don't know, that young guy happens to be that guy we're looking at right now. It's just fascinating how did you pick that picture out to be your cover? Is the question I had.
I had, it was before like stuff was digitized, and I had like just a couple of pictures in a shoebox, and a lot of slides and things, but they didn't have the ability to do anything with it. But I did have this one picture. And I don't know why I had that picture, but I said, here's a picture, and I had a map, and I had a few other just, things like we all had, that was just, crap that came home that we couldn't get rid of. And they, Tom, I showed you the original of that picture, didn't I? But what's harder to see, but you can see with the original of the book, is that it's, what's behind it is a map of the DMZ. Mm-hmm. And there are little circles in different places about where fire targets were. But that was, so they had a graphic artist that they have that do that stuff, but that's where it came from.
And here's another wonderful picture. Oh, Richard, here, I'm going to ask you to unmute Richard. This I think is my favorite picture of you. First of all, what a handsome young man you are. And second of all, can you explain to the group what you're holding up there?
That was my Harvard acceptance. And it was in
that you received in country on the DMZ.
I received a day before I was going on R&R. You can imagine the joy that I had on R&R. When I got there, I decided I was going to apply to, I'd been advised, but I was going to apply to 2 colleges, and one was Harvard and one was Boston University. My family was from Boston. And why Harvard if I hadn't done that well? And prep school, well, that was, they were interested in people like me who had different experiences. The Vietnam War was heated up. They thought maybe having a veteran there might cool things down. I don't know. But it was, I applied after my first fire in December for a really, really nasty, awful fire in the rain, and I didn't hear anything. And then on around April 15th or 16th, when college acceptances then used to come out, I got this in the mail, and I thought, I didn't know, and the mail was very good over there. We got mail, very quickly and sort of on time. But here was this big envelope from Harvard, and I just thought maybe they wanted to know what my grandmother's name was or something. I mean, it was so random, and I opened it up, and there it was. And there was nobody that I could tell. No, because nobody knew. And I had one guy that my friend Dan Burton, who I talk about, the pot smoking California surfer, that did know, and he took the picture and he lifted me up and swung me around and said, "Holy cow!" And a couple of the officers came up to me a couple of lieutenants came up to me. They knew what it was at different times, and they were just bewildered, that this Lance Corporal was going. I mean, this shit bum dirt Lance Corporal fire team leader in their squad was going to be going to Harvard in 2 months.
So is Dan Burton the same Dan that's in the Zoom room right here with us from Mexico, lives in Mexico?
Is Dan here?
Dan's here. Hold on. Let's get him. Yeah,
Dan.
he's Dan. Let's see here.
Yes. I mean, that would be the same if he's there. I mean, I can't believe if you've got Dan on.
Yep. Well, let's get Dan on. Dan. He was on early. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
And Richard, here, I'm going to ask you, Dan, to unmute. Richard, why don't you ask or make your comment also?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of comments really quick. First, I want to thank Jack McLean for writing the book, because for like 20, 25 years or so, I forgot I was a veteran. And then somebody said, hey, there's a book called Loon. Read the book. And I read the book, and I finally snapped out of my my haze and realized, you know what? I'm actually a veteran, thanks to Jack's book, and a veteran.
God bless you. Nothing could make me. Nothing could.
I mean, that just blew my mind. I said, oh my God, I'm a veteran. I didn't realize. I forgot I was a veteran. And I wanted to ask you, Jack, if it's okay if we pass this on to Todd for being such a good guy, this patch.
You can pass. You can pass that on to Todd. I know just what
the
your
Loon patch is rare, and it's only legal if guys from Loon give it to you, Todd.
How the hell did you ever get it?
Huh?
How'd you get it?
Well, Dan Burton, Canton T, he
God bless him.
He made it happen for us.
Yeah.
And, but you know how cool he is. And one more thing.
He's the one that made that patch happen.
Well, his wife designed
or Carrie did, his wife.
Yeah. She look how cool that patch is. I mean, here, look at it. It's on my arm there. So you see that?
Yeah.
Is that awesome or what?
I'd have to leave to go get my jacket to show you mine.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Oh,
you got your patches, right?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Dan gave it. Dan gave it to
you were
me.
talking about corregidor. Have you ever read this book, Suchi?
Suchi the Marine.
Tell me the name
The
again.
ending of the China Marines. This is how the China Marines.
Oh
ended.
yeah. I did see. Yeah.
Chu Chow the Marine. This is a dog that was actually a Marine. He wasn't a mascot. He was I think he made sergeant, but he got busted down a couple of times.
Happens.
Bad behavior. But yeah, that tells the end of the China Marines, the ending.
Oh, there were some of our proudest
That
moments.
story has all the dates and everything like that. And also one last thing, I'm sorry, but we're working on a new book that's going to be something that pertains to Loon Marine Store. We're collecting short stories of Marines that were on LZ Loon, and we're making a collection and putting them in a book. If anybody has any Loon stories, LZ Loon stories, of which there are a lot, and you can send it to landing zone loon@gmail.com. Thank you.
Gotcha.
landingzoneloon@gmail.com. Dan, if you could speak up, and Zachary Wood, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Dan, can you, are you unmuted?
I'm here.
Hey.
Dano.
Hey, what's up, Jack? Richard, how we doing?
Dano, this is the best. What a surprise.
Oh, I wouldn't gonna miss this. You kidding me? I mean, with our history.
I'll tell you a quick Dan Burton story. When I wrote Loon, the last thing that Random House did was go through the copy editing process. And they had to go through all things I said about different people and this and that. The first thing they said is, you describe your foxhole buddy here, Dan Burton, as being a pot smoking California surfer.
Yeah.
And you think that his family, his prodigy, his, all the legal stuff would object. And I said, geez, I mean, I never thought about it. I never thought about it, but I mean, let me get a hold of him. My instinct is he'd probably wear it as a badge of honor. So I called him, and I think that his reaction, as I recall, Dano, was, you're telling me that for the rest of perpetuity and time, I'm going to be in the Library of Congress as a pot-smoking California surfer? I mean, it makes the whole thing worthwhile.
No, I don't know if I'm still on camera, but check it out.
You know, we can't see you, or at least I can't see you. I could hear
You see
you.
it, Dan.
Can you guys see it?
I
No,
can't
we don't see
it.
you. Just a black screen. That's all we see.
What the hell? I had my wife kind of get me into the Zoom thing here, and
Mistake number one.
obviously it's not working really well, but
We'll get her over there to troubleshoot. Okay.
well, she's not feeling well. So anyway,
Oh,
Dano, this is incredible that you're there. This is just
well, it's great. I can hear you guys, and I can see you, Jack, and I can see Richard. I can see y'all. I just, for whatever reason, I can't get my camera to work. But anyhow, go ahead. I've got a picture to show you once the thing is squared away.
okay. And this is wonderful because I want to ask you all, of course, to tell the story of LZ Loon, but Zachary Wood, how are you, Zachary?
I'm great. Jack, how's it going, buddy?
Zach, what the hell are you doing here?
I got an email and I thought I'd pop in and see what's going on.
It's like old home week.
No kidding. So it's good to see you there, Tom, and you too, Rick. I had a quick question. So you get this Harvard acceptance letter the day before you go R&R. And when you're on R&R and knowing you're going to Harvard, did that change your mindset going back into the bush, knowing that you were going to go to Harvard?
Yes. Great question.
Maybe. I mean, it was before Loon, and I don't think so. Dano could answer that. I mean, he was right there before and after, and but I don't. And I was also getting short, so that probably changed my thing. But I don't think so, Zach. I don't think it made. I was a squad leader. I had people to watch out for. We had stuff going. I mean, I was a Marine. I don't think I let my guard down for a minute.
But it's such an incongruous moment of you being, out there, a Marine, about to head off to one of the, big battles of the Vietnam War in 1968. And there you are with an acceptance letter to Harvard. It just seems incongruous, like two different worlds, two different worlds entirely. And all I could think about when I see that picture is, I hope that kid lives. I hope that kid survives and goes.
It was incongruous, and I think the only, and I think you probably agree with this, Dano. I mean, the only, the one person who understood what it was Dan, and he and I were so close, and he just understood what, he understood what it was, and all I needed was one person to sort of know. I mean, just to tell me I wasn't crazy, that this had really happened. But it was something. I can't believe you're on this call, Dan.
James Roush, you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute if you can.
Hey, Carrie.
James, go ahead. If you could ask your question or make your comment. James, I think we could hear you. Okay, I guess I can't hear you. Can't hear you clearly. All right. Let me ask then, let me go back to you, Jack, and ask you if you could just remember your initial impression of Vietnam when you landed.
Hot.
Hot.
Yeah. Hot.
Smelly.
No, when I landed, we landed in Da Nang, and
Okay.
Da Nang was at the time a Marine Corps base. So it looked like a Marine Corps base. I mean, everything was, red and gold, Jeeps going around, Quonset huts, little, it was dusty, it was dirty. There were things that I noticed that were different. Say what?
No, they can't see me on the video.
Right.
Well, we could hear you, Dan. So I'm going to mute you. Here we go.
I remember. I remember coming off. Coming in. I remember how green it was. It was just as we flew in, when we're up at 10,000 feet landing and making the big circle around. And then when we landed, it was all just the activity of a Marine Corps base, and we got directed over to a Quonset hut, or a building that had a couple of signs, or there was a guy standing there who took your orders and said, okay, you go stand in that line, you go stand in that line. And I have a picture of it. One of the lines says Fubai Dong Ha, the other line says Kaisan something else. And they're places where you get in that line, you're going to go on a plane to that place, wherever your unit is. And we went up to, so I got on a C-130 and went to Fubai, and which was about a half-hour flight maybe. And that was where I had the moment I mentioned earlier, where I looked at the people across from me. Some guys still had blood on them. Some guys were, these salty old utilities. And I said, holy shit, boy, I mean, this is, and some guys were just as green and scared as I was. And I could tell you that anybody that says they weren't scared is lying.
What was the first time you remember you were shot at?
December 6th, Dano. Right? Oh, Dan was down. It was right before Dan came. We were in we went up to up to the DMZ, and we were in we got in, us and Charlie Company, Delta Company, we got into a firefight. I was behind lines, so I wasn't on the lines, but I can remember late in the afternoon, a squad coming back who we knew had been in some action out there with carrying a poncho with an arm hanging off it. And, obviously, the guy was dead. Right. Before the night was over, we got, bombed. A jet dropped like a 500-pound bomb on us that was misdirected, that killed 4 or 5 people. The helicopter, the medevac helicopter, got shot down. So I'm there saying, this is my first real night in the field. We've been bombed and the helicopter has been shot down, and I'm seeing 2 or 3 people that are dead anyway. There turned out there were a lot more than that. And it was an introduction, to say the least. It was frightening. I can't describe it.
I'm going to break in and just say, again, I'm Todd DiPastino. This is our VBC happy hour. You know that I like to have a little station break just to remind people what we're doing and who we are. And I also want to invite people to get on our mailing list and get our VBC magazine. We put a lot of work into this magazine. We write up the stories that we hear on our programs, and we send this out quarterly. And our new one is just back from the printer. You should be getting this in your mailboxes next week or so. And if you don't get it, it's because we don't have your address. If you'd like to get it, please do just send me an email, Todd, TODD, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. That's Todd, TODD, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. This is some of the most important marketing, I guess, or advertising that the Veterans Breakfast Club does. I'll send out boxes. Actually, Jim Jameson, who's on tonight, Air Force veteran, will send out boxes to people, and they distribute them. And this is how people find out about the programs that we run and the stories that we share. So we'd be happy to send this to you. Let us know, Todd, TODD, at veteransbreakfastclub.com. Just let me know, and I'll send you a box of these wonderful magazines. They really are wonderful. I also want to let people know we like to do a feedback survey for every program we do. It's 3 simple questions. It'll take you not even 90 seconds to complete it. What did you think of the program? What did you like or not like about it? How can we improve? And we take these suggestions to heart. I'm telling you, we read every one, and I take them very seriously. And so please do. If you can, I will share the link here in the chat. All right, that's it. Hey, Ken Kazak, please do feel free to chime in anytime you'd like. I'd like to get...
Yeah, Jack, first off, I think you and I have 2 things in common, love of baseball and difficulty passing math. College or high school. I'm a remedial math student at community college, but what really stood out in the book here, and I know that people on here are going to read the book, and this will not in any way ruin it for them, but Loon, landing zone, and let me step back a little bit. So you go into the Marines for 2 years. 2 years, correct?
Yeah.
Basic training basically is 3 months. So you were down to 21 months, right?
Yeah.
You end up in a supply hut in Barstow, California. And did you think like your next 21 months were going to be spent there? Did you?
In the beginning, I did. In the beginning, I said, like, to use the time-worn phrase, like sort of dodge the bullet,
Yeah.
But the longer I was there, the more I really thought that, I don't know, like I was living a lie, I mean, that I'd gone through all of that. And here I was working in a supply warehouse in the middle of the desert, sending material places. And what was I doing this for? I mean, it was more like sort of the timeout 2 years that I thought of without going in the military. And I had a dear friend you read about in the book, Sid McLeod, that volunteered every chance he could get, just wanted to go, wanted to do it, wanted to go. And when we all got orders, he had taken his leave a week later, and he came back, and all of us, we went over there, like 13 of us went there from supply school. We came back from our annual leave. We all got orders. Sid did not. And so all of us, went when Sid came back a week later, we were all gone. He basically said that's not fair, and how he and things were so desperate by this time. It was July 1967 that he didn't have any trouble getting orders at that time, and he was the only one of us that was killed.
Mm.
He was killed at Quezon in May 1968.
So the Loon, and we've had Thomas on before talking about LZ sitting duck, but I think that's the center point of the book here, that this LZ Loon, as you wrote about it, such a horrific battle that the 3 days in June of 1968, that was the entirety of the Vietnam War.
It was for me.
Yeah. And, if you don't mind, because you put this in the book and I did some other research, that's 1968 was such a monumental year. Pueblo was in January, 2 assassinations of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, Nixon gets a nomination. The Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia, and the upheaval in Chicago. And that all happened before the end of August. And the Battle of Loon, like, when did you find out Robert Kennedy was assassinated? It happened while you were in this battle.
It happened in the middle of the battle. And we came back. I think we got evacuated to, I think Dan and I got evacuated. I think Dan got evacuated to Quezon. I got evacuated to Vandergrift, maybe. And we found out maybe a day or two later. It was just here's another thing that happened. And this was after the, Martin Luther King. And it was like another thing that had happened. I mean, what else can happen? And we're here, at the, I mean, I don't want to say who cares, because we cared deeply, because we were Marines doing our job, but it was just sort of another gut punch,
Right. So you were actually active duty till July of 68.
Well, yeah, July, early August, yeah.
Early August. But I think this is the thing that, one of the things attracted me to your story. You took that Harvard acceptance letter and you enrolled in Harvard in September.
A couple of weeks later. Yeah.
A couple of weeks later. So June, you were in this horrific battle. September, you were on one of the toniest campuses in the country. And by the way, I shared this with Todd. the story when you were sitting on the library steps going into the orientation and you saw an attractive girl.
Yeah.
And I loved your phrase. I always use the expression approach and open. You opened the female, started conversation with her. And your Marine service impressed us all, but it didn't impress that young lady. Did you ever see her on campus after that?
I did. I was saying this to somebody the other day. I hadn't thought of it in a long time. I knew who she was. And I was at my 50th reunion a few months ago, and she was there 50 years later. And I never said anything to her. I never said anything to anybody else. I had a friend of mine who knew, a good friend of mine knew the story and said, again, asked, said, who was she? Is she here? And I said, yeah, she's here. But it was too confusing to say who she was. I never had a sentence. I never uttered a sentence to her. I'd see her around campus, for 4 years. She was, she was sort of lovely. She would catch your eye, but she was never, no.
So you had shared earlier that you wrote 102 letters home, and I guess Marines and service people don't write letters anymore. They email home, and it was your mom saved all these letters. And yeah. I know from your bio that you lived in different places. So I assume wherever you moved to, you took these letters with you.
Well, in fact, I moved to a lot of places and mom hung onto the letters. And then when my mother died in the late 80s, I sort of got the letters, and it was, and they stayed in the shoebox. And when I was remarried, I don't know, 10 years later, 15 years later, my then wife was not a particularly sentimental person. And we were going through my apartment saying, well, we, get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this. And we had the save bin and the other bin, and I didn't have to do that much in my apartment. And she's holding this box of letters and said, what are these? And I said, oh, those are the letters I wrote home when I was in the Marine Corps and in Vietnam. And she said, just okay, but they go in this bin or that bin. And I said, no, I don't know. I guess I should save them. Why? Because my mother always thought that I could write a book about them. And then she said, why don't you? And that was something I didn't have an answer to. And that was when my wheels were starting to come off anyway, from my PTSD, from my exposure to Agent Orange, from diabetes. I mean, all these things were just starting to catch up with me, as they did with so many vets so many years later. And I just sat down and I started to transcribe them as therapy. And one thing led to another.
Well, you said that you started to transcribe them for your daughters and then for people that you met from Charlie Company. But when you were just writing the letters, and then what was the format? How were you presenting those?
The letters.
Just the letters themselves.
Yeah, the letters. I wrote the letters, and then I went back and I said I should probably fill in some blanks here. If I talk about, Dan Burton, I should probably say who Dan Burton is and put a little backstory in there. If I'm talking about different things in boot camp, I should probably put some context in there for things that I talk about. And then I started putting sort of muscle on the bones, if that makes sense. And I kept going. And when I finally got this editor number of years later, and I wanted it to be me talking through my letters. I wanted to be, the story of a 19-year-old talking through letters. And she said, you're a much better writer now than you were at 19. And which isn't, I said, well, okay, so, and she said, no, I mean, the story of you telling it now, the stuff that you have in the muscle is better than the stuff that you had on the bones, on your letters. And so I went from having 102 letters to having, I don't know, maybe a paragraph or two from different letters I might have put in. And it was I mean, I didn't know that I was a writer. I didn't know that, you know, that I had no thought that, you know, I had no thought that I was a writer. I just was putting in stuff until she said, you know, how that it was much better, that it fit much better that way.
When did it happen that in the fellow, you lived above a fellow's garage in North Carolina?
I
Kill with the unusual town name of Kill Devil Hills. But
Yeah.
was he also a Marine?
Yeah, he was in Charlie Company.
Charlie Company.
With me and Dad. Yeah.
So you moved in above this garage, and that's when this is going to be a book. That's when you started the process. But
well, the process, that was actually when the process ended, and I had, assuming my former wife's not on this call, I was living in Georgetown, and our marriage ended with the final words of, "I don't care if I ever hear the word Vietnam again." And I'd spent a good deal of the previous 5 years writing, going through this, and it was more than writing. It was therapy. It was my therapy. And so that was that. And Terry, the guy whose garage I'd been living in Kill Devil Hills, where in fact the Wright brothers flew their first plane, was a huge source of, as Dan would attest, of information. He had I tell people he was cursed with a near perfect knowledge of everything that happened to us while we were there. And so he was a good guy to bounce things off of. But I got I finished writing it right before I went down there, and I got the offer from Random House right when I got there, and they weren't going to publish it for another year. So I had a year down there when I basically knew that it was going to be published, and I got the advance, which was fortunate because I didn't have a pot to piss in. So explains the living over the garage part.
I'm sorry, Ken. I would just want to interrupt you for a second, just because we haven't really talked about LZ Loon, and I just thought that it would be good to set the scene for this battle. I see that we see Dan now, and fine-looking man. Thank you, Dan, for joining us and getting that screen working. Here is a map of the DMZ. And LZ Loon, from what I can remember, is southwest of Khe Sanh. Here's Khe Sanh Combat Base right here. You have Con Tien right here. This is Highway 9 that
go
winds
down
through.
Yeah, I think if you just go down a little bit from Long Vey there.
So it's south of Long Vey?
You see Ko Rock on the left. Ko Rock is Laos.
There it is. That's it. Yeah.
And Ko Rock is where the guns were. And those weren't only the guns that hit us. Those were the guns that for months hit Khe Sanh that were buried in a mountain that we could not reach. And Bill Negron, our dear leader and company commander, knew that they were coming from the artillery was coming from there. And so he called back to wherever ours was coming from, and Vandergrift or wherever we were getting our fire support from, and he put in the coordinates for Ko Rock, and they said, "We can't. You military guys will appreciate this. We can't do that. That's in Laos. We can't shoot into Laos." And he said, "Well, that's where the guns are." Expletive deleted, and then. So he said, "Okay, let's try this." So he called in a site that would be, say, just south of, say, where Long Vey is on that map. And they'd say, "Okay, we'll fire." And they'd fire a couple of rounds. He'd say, "Okay, add 3 clicks." They add 3 clicks, they go to the border. Add 3 clicks, they go 3 clicks more. You could click all your way into Thailand. But if you called in the original strike into another country, you couldn't do it. So he was able to call in guns on it by doing that, which I always thought was, sort of fun.
Because the corrections weren't reported. It was just the initial coordinates.
Yeah. The corrections were just between you liking the gunner. Isn't that right, Dan?
Right.
Absolutely.
I have that right. Dan, I can see you now. You look great.
I asked Dan and I asked Richard to unmute. And also we have Mary. Mary Boyce is here. Mary's late husband was a crew chief on the helicopter that crashed, attempting to execute a rescue off LZ Loon. Thank you, Mary, for joining us.
Where did you all come from? How did you get on this call? This is amazing. Mary, God, Mary, it's just so good to I can't believe it.
And I'm going to ask Mary to unmute. And Sharon George, you have a question that you'd like to ask?
I do. I'd like to ask Jack and maybe even Dan, what do combat veterans know about life that civilians do not?
That it's hard.
Oh, that's an easy one, Dan.
Really,
come on.
Really, really hard.
Mary Boyce, I just want to say hi, Mary.
Hi.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, Jack.
Oh, it's so great
to hear your voice.
Oh, great to hear your voice too.
Thank you. This was Richard Everington emailed me yesterday with this information, so I'm glad that I'm able to listen in. I'm sitting out at my granddaughter's soccer match right now, but thoroughly enjoying this dialogue that you all are having about your experiences in Vietnam.
Mary's late.
I love hearing that noise in the background. I'm going to mute you now, Mary. And if you want to unmute,
let me just say, Mary's late husband was one of the incredible, valiant Marine helicopter crews that came in and saved our ass. And he was in a helicopter that was shot down, that was going in to pick up guys of ours that were isolated. Dan and I watched in horror as the helicopter was shot down. We will never forget that moment, and burst into flames, and her husband survived. As did 3 or 4, Sal and a few other people, Dano, right?
Sal Santangelo, yep.
And Bill Negron, after the crash, had us at some point, things were not looking good. He had us all, those few of us that were left, he had us all stand up and sing the Marine Corps hymn. And I thought it was just sort of a big, like, fuck you to the bad guys, that were, you can't get us. And when Dan and I hooked up with Bill 30 years later, Dano, and I said, gee, remember that? I always thought that was so cool, that you had to stand up and sing the Marine Corps hymn. And he said, well, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to have you all stand up. I mean, it's not that. It's I had you do it. So the guys who were in, if there's anybody alive out of that helicopter, would know where we were, because I knew they'd be disoriented. I knew they'd be, thrown off. And Mary's husband was one of them. And another chopper came in and pulled him out, and I had the great honor to meet him and his many of his crew, and Zim and Jarvis. I just talked to Jarvis the other day, Mary, and they're just incredible people that came in and saved us. And I can't. What Marine Corps helicopter crews did during that war, for them it was another Tuesday at the office. For us, it was the
incidentally, if you go to the Papa Smoke website,
right,
all the helicopter stories are there. Just incredible bravery, coming into LZs under fire, just amazing stuff.
Really,
this is amazing stuff.
I wanted to mention something about Mike Boyce, if you don't mind.
Sure. And then we go to Michael and Claudia. I see your hand is up, and Zachary, your hand is also up again. Okay, Richard.
Yeah, I remember. I always remember Mike Boyce, the crew chief on that chopper, because I was walking wounded and I was helping to load the chopper with the KIAs and the wounded. Did wounded first, and then we loaded some KIAs on there, wounded first, and then I was getting ready to get on the chopper, and it was loaded, and then some guys from H&S were ordered to take the chopper, and they didn't see that we had already loaded that chopper, Mike Boyce's chopper, already loaded, and so it was like too full, and so Mike Boyce gave me and the other guy, another Marine, the signal to like not get on board because it was too full. It wasn't overloaded after we left; it was loaded, and it was an older chopper, the A model 46, and so it took off, and it was just it took off, and I still remember Mike Boyce's eyes like giving me that look like "Don't come on board; it's too loaded," and that's the one that got shot down. And I watched it go down the hill. So I'll always remember Mike Boyce, for pulling, taking us off, telling us not to come on the chopper.
Not to come on.
And his is another story that like we want to collect all these stories. And later, for 40 years, I thought he was dead. I thought everybody was dead on that chopper. And then I found out that he actually survived. And he wanted to know how the chopper got shot down. And I told him because I was there. And because his memory was gone from the moment coming to LZ Loon and picking up the people, and his memory starts after he was rescued. So he didn't remember how it happened. And
when Rick says his memory was gone, I mean, his memory was gone.
Yeah.
And he, as Mary would attest, he rebuilt it piece by piece by piece for 30 years. To come back, but he had no direct memory of anything that happened in that time.
Traumatic amnesia. Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yep.
Hey, I want to let people know it is 8:28. We asked Jack to stay till 8:30. Jack, are you willing to stay overtime? I mean, we have so much more to discuss. This is so fascinating. Would you mind staying with us, say, another 20 minutes or so?
As long as you'd have me.
All right. I'm thank
honored,
you.
Todd, of course.
Thank you. Michael, you had your hand up. Michael, another Vietnam Army veteran. Why don't you ask a question or make your comment? Oh, you muted yourself. Here, I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
Try again?
Yep,
Okay.
you're good.
Your question about what do military know that civilians don't, and that's that death is present, and you can power through it. You either will power through it successfully or not, but you can't choose not to do it.
Death is present, and you have to power through it.
That you power through it, and you either succeed or you don't.
Yeah.
Either succeed or you don't.
Yeah,
That sounds.
No choice.
Claudia?
I just want to say thank you for writing this book. Jack, you and I met the day of Bruce's funeral, if you remember. My husband, Bruce Zaruda.
Oh, boy.
Do you remember? He's been gone 3 years now, and he was really proud of this story because it was also part of his story. And the fact that you put Joe Klein in, who he was very good friends with, and
we all have that Jersey connection.
Yeah, so I just wanted to thank you not only for my husband, but for his family.
He was one of the, I don't know, one of the unluckiest people and the nicest person, without question, that God ever put on this earth, in addition to the unluckiest. Not only did he survive LZ Loon, he also survived with Rick Everington, the battle at Cam Low, in which their squad mate, Larry Maxim, received the Medal of Honor in February 2nd. Is that about right, Rick?
Well, actually, I came right after Cam Lowe. I came right after Cam Lowe. I kind of replaced Larry Maxim.
Well,
I was
it
one of
was,
his replacements. So yeah.
but he was there, and then he was at Loon, and not only was he at Loon, but along with Rick and others in Delta Company, they were on the lines that were being, there were actually people doing like hand-to-hand combat. I mean, and I ran into him next at a peace rally in Boston in 1969. And I'm walking down with 100,000 people. And here's this guy walking along the curb with hair. He's got long hair. I got long hair. I look at him. He looks at me. And we hadn't really known each other that well, but we catch each other's eye, and then we turn away, and then we go back and say, there's something here. And I said, finally, I know you. And he said, I know you. And I said, I just can't do it. And he said, Aruda, Delta Company. And I said, what are you doing here? I mean, what? And we lost touch again until we reconnected at one of Harold's reunions down in North Carolina a few years ago. And he and I got sick at the same time. And I fortunately got from Agent Orange, I got prostate cancer that was pretty easily remedied these days. And Bruce, in one of the the most awful things imaginable, which is as recent as today's headlines, died from leukemia from drinking the water at Camp Lejeune during our infantry training in 1966. And it was, I mean, it's on every station all the time now, but back then nobody knew. And I said, Bruce, what do you mean the drinking water? I mean, the drinking water at Camp Lejeune? And he said, yeah, they can track it. They can track it back. And I just thought, God, I mean, he's in Cam Lowe, he's at Loon, and he has a glass of water during infantry training. And I mean, it's just but it was, as Rick would attest, it was the most moving, lovely, simple ceremony with the lunch at the church afterwards, and all the just the covered pot stuff, and that beautiful, beautiful place where you live. And he was just, I talked to him, I don't know, every month or so, but when I keep wanting to come down to see him, and he spent, by that time he was really locked up in the University of Pennsylvania Medical Center, and really had a tough. What a dream to see you here. I mean, I just can't believe you're here, and you look fabulous. And he was, God bless you. I mean, and God bless him and your beautiful children, and all of those wonderful, wonderful friends we met that day. I mean, it was just, oh boy, this is way beyond what I signed up for.
I'm honored that you joined us, Claudia. Thank you so much. I know, man. Bob Iyer, you wanted to say something. Bob might have dropped off. His hand was up.
I'm still here.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Real good. As a result of last week's program, I bought the book on my Kindle, and I'm 71% complete, just going into your insertion into LZ Loom. And I guess I'm surprised you went in on an assault using Chinooks.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, they were not Chinook. Chinook's Army. Those are CH-47s.
Oh, CH-47. Did I call this Chinook?
Yeah, we were in CH-46, which is also a dual prop helicopter. They call them frogs, PHROGS.
Well, I'm surprised you're talking about the lift coming down on the back end. So, and you put a couple of squads in there, so they were a lot larger than at least what we were used to in our Hueys in the first Cav. Oh yeah, they're big.
Yeah,
that's Army right there.
No, it certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't a Huey. That was.
Well, I can understand the challenges of getting off of a Chinook under fire as you were. So, and also the extraction of the wounded. So you Marines had a tough road there.
We got a couple of lucky people on this call right now. A couple of lucky people.
Jack and I are two of the very few people that didn't get a scratch there.
Yeah.
Well, Jack got a scratch. Jack, you were taking shrapnel out of your body for 15 years after LZ.
Yeah,
were you not?
But really qualifies as a scratch. I mean, it was from the from the round that came in on the LZ, and it was all across my shoulder. It was like 100 little tiny pieces I wasn't even aware of until later.
And you never received a Purple Heart for that?
No, for that, no. Boot camp, they used to call in boot camp, they used to call our drill instructors used to call Purple Heart the coward's ribbon.
Oh God! Oh, jeez, you guys are tough. Thomas,
I'd like to say, for the audience, like Rick, Dan, Claudia can testify to this. That these guys, 1-4, they were extremely close to the DMZ, and these guys saw some of the most, I guess you could say, heated battles of the Vietnam War. I mean, these guys were in the Argonne Valley, Mutter's Ridge, Loon. And it was truly an honor, meeting Jack. We spoke millions of times, and just Jack inspired me to write my book. Of course, we got another 1-4 author, Carl Milanes. And when you speak about, the CH-46s, and Jack was mentioning too, there every year there's a reunion in North Carolina for Charlie Company 1-4 and its sister companies. And it's truly amazing how one of the individuals there made memorials for all the names of the KIAs, at Loon.
Ronnie Riggs.
Yeah, Ronnie Riggs. And, me as a Coast Guard veteran, I wrote a Marine Corps battle book, and it's truly an honor to be, speaking to these guys, meeting them, talking to them, because, like Dan and Jack and Rick can testify, these guys, veterans don't talk much about their experience. And when they do, it's just a flood of emotions. And it's truly amazing to capture their stories for eternity, to just read and hear what these guys went through. But, I was also able to meet another individual that's called Zachary. Bright young man, is interested in writing about history. But we met about Harold's place, and when we were talking about the helicopters, Harold Wilson, I think the most fascinating story about Harold is when he at a battle 44-400, how in one of Carl's books, What It's Like to Go to War, describes him of jumping off the back of the helicopter to be with his platoon he did not want to leave. It's just fascinating stories about what, like, Rick and Dan and Carl, what these guys went through is truly honorable to just hear their stories and just be around these guys for, what they've done.
And Zachary is with us. Zachary, so you are one of these researchers who is fascinated, as I am, with the Marine story in I Corps in Vietnam.
Yes, sir. I teach high school history here in Western North Carolina, and for the past 2 years, I've been interviewing Marine Corps veterans who fought in Vietnam, and I use that information in my classroom. I teach about Vietnam. I don't teach about it. I let my students hear the interviews that I've recorded and see the transcriptions so that they can see Vietnam from their perspective of those that were there. And Mr. DiPastino has this pulled up. After attending the Charlie 1-4 reunion, I was fortunate to be, I don't want to say fortunate in some ways, but to be gifted this poster. And this is a list of all the Charlie Company Marines killed in action from 1967 to 1969. And I laminated this and I put this right beside my door. So every time my students leave my classroom, they can see the names of the Marines from Charlie Company who died in Vietnam, and that they can take that with them. And for Vietnam Veterans Day, whenever that rolls around in March, I'm going to have them researching Marines from Charlie Company and who they were.
And this is one company, and these kids were probably not much older than your students.
Right.
Amazing. Thank you, Zachary, for the work you do, teaching, passing on these stories. Absolutely true. I used to teach a course on the Vietnam War at Penn State, branch campus of Penn State. The kids would sleep through my lectures, but I'd bring in a Vietnam veteran and they would be hanging on every word. It makes it real. It makes the history real. It brings it home. These aren't just, these aren't just names and dates in a textbook. These are events that people live through, and now it's part of history. And we're lucky enough to be able to have conversations with them here. Ken, do you have more questions here?
I do, but I think with Dan's appearance and Zachary and Thomas is here, I'm just going to share this with Jack. I mean, I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate our correspondence, and I always think about this, Jack, is like, when you finish the book, isn't it a great relief? All the things that are in your brain, to know that they're down on paper or now a computer file. They're saved for eternity. It's still part of you. It's still your memory, but to have it down. And may I ask this question? What you started saying that you started transcribing the letters for your daughters when they read the book. When anybody read the book, may I ask, what was their reaction?
Good question.
I had when I first met Terry Tillery, Dan's and my dear friend and platoon mate, I went down to North Carolina, and he and I spent a whole night talking about it, and the whole next day talking about it in this picnic up in Newport Beach, drinking tequila and shooting Jello shots. And I mean, it was just these wonderful Southern things I didn't know, had been unexposed to. And the whole time we were talking about Vietnam, and the whole time his daughter, Kristen, who at the time was, I don't know, 24, 25, maybe, Dana, was sitting next to us. And when it was over, we were getting up, we were packing up the picnic, and I mean, there were 1,000 people. There was a big sort of community thing. And Kristen came over to me, and I just met her that day. And she said, I want to thank you for bringing all this, getting Dad to really talk about Vietnam. I'd never heard him talk about Vietnam. And I said, what do you mean you've never heard him talk about Vietnam? I mean, Terry has more in a quarter of his brain than most people have on the subject. She said, no, he never ever spoke about it. So I said, well, I can't believe it. So next time I saw my daughters, say Thanksgiving or something, I was saying, oh, here's one for you. I met Terry Tillery, who I served with. And it was so funny because, he was saying that, in all these years, his daughter, she'd never heard him talk about Vietnam. And my daughters looked at me like I was a ghost. And they said, well, look who's Mr. Chatty, They never heard a word from me. I talked about Vietnam 24 hours a day to myself, and it never reached my larynx or my lips. I recounted things. I looked at things. I thought I was telling people things, nothing. And when I first began writing Loon, I had the original letters, and I showed them. I sent them to Kristen, his daughter. I said, well, I wrote these letters if you want to see them. And she said, yeah. So I sent her the letters the next day, which I'd had transcribed at this point, well before I started writing the book. And I didn't hear back. And so I called Terry one day and I said, whatever happened to those, the letters I sent down to Kristen? It was before, you'd email stuff. And he said, oh, they they went to my brother, and then my sister saw them, and I think my mother has them now. And not long after that, I got a letter from his mother, who I didn't know from anything. And she said, I want to thank you for these letters. It was the first time I've known what my son Terry went through in Vietnam. And so I called Terry and I said, like a Marine, the fuck? I mean, didn't you ever write home? And he said, yeah, I wrote home every week. I said, well, what did you say? He said, this sucks, send socks. That was pretty much it, But no, that was astounded. People really didn't say much at all.
I want to say hi to Joe Griffey's. I see a Vietnam veteran, 4th Infantry Division. Joe is, people know him from, I think, his Welcome Home radio show at Cape May, New Jersey.
Joe, how are you doing, man?
WIBG.
How do all you guys know about this before I know about this? This is amazing.
Rick Everington.
If I can,
Yeah,
if I can
Everington,
ask, Todd, if I can ask Jack one question.
Yes.
Jack, a lot of Vietnam veterans. I was in the Army. We were told we weren't smart enough to go to college, so we were perfect to go to Vietnam. You give me the honor every day, my friend, to tell people I have a brother that went to Harvard. Thank you.
Joe was a very close and had strong connections with the Kildare family in Philadelphia.
Oh, mine.
And
Mike was in my squad.
And Danny knew Michael very well. And,
Believe it or not, Eddie Sullivan, Michael's brother-in-law, and his sister Marianne are very. They're my next door neighbors. Marianne passed away a couple years ago, but Eddie and I talk about Jack all the time, and Michael, and the loon, and I'm just honored to call Jack my friend.
well, Joe, you do great things down there in South Jersey. Joe has a show that's been going on for 10 years. I mean, the Welcome Home show, and he is as big an advocate for veterans as there is anywhere.
Joe, I just want to mention that Mike Kildare's high school, you're familiar with it, I'm sure.
Father
correct?
Judge.
Father Judge High School lost 27 young souls to Vietnam.
The Cardinal Doherty, the high school I went to, also lost 27, but Thomas Edison High School in Philadelphia lost 64 graduates.
Holy
We lost a total of 648 veterans within the boundaries of the city of Philadelphia that went to Catholic, private, and public high schools.
That's amazing.
It was a real eye opener for me going down there. I went down for to see Joe. I went down for Michael's funeral, and I mean, not Michael, his brother. What was his brother's name?
Charlie.
Yeah.
No, Michael Kudare's brother's name, Johnny or Joey. I forget right now.
An Irish name, Patrick. Oh.
I actually, believe it or not, Jack, the book that you sent with Michael's pictures and all in, Marianne, right a couple days before she died, she gave it to me. So I have that book that you sent to the Kildare family. They gave it to me.
Oh, wow.
And I cherish it.
Well, it's great to see you, Joe. You do great work for all of us. You do great.
Well, it's like this Zoom, Jack. It's like this Zoom. You surround yourself with a lot of great people, you get great things done.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
One of the things that your book describes so well is not just the battle, the fighting in Vietnam, Jack, but the homecoming. And I thought I'd read these couple paragraphs just because I think it captures so well that the immediate sense of what it was like to be home. This is you, Treasure Island, San Francisco, sitting on a curb in the sun, waiting for your sister to pick you up just after you had got home from Vietnam. The sun grew warmer on my back as the first hour elapsed in silence. There was not a soul in sight. My senses were overcome, working in an overloaded state to reprogram my brain to its new reality. Most apparent at first was the silence, the deafening silence. For nearly a year, there existed an explosive norm of noise coming from 24-hour-a-day bombing, outgoing and incoming artillery, choppers, constant choppers, and the everyday sounds made by 250 boys living in very close quarters. Now there was silence. I tried to return my mind to the present, but the past became more awful with each fleeting recollection. Images of the hundreds of grotesque enemy bodies still splayed across LZ Loon the day we returned, their bodies fragmented from the bombs and charred by the napalm, the long patrols through the fetid rice paddies and suffocating air that offered no relief. I remember drinking canteens, full of swamp water, flavored with halazone purification tablets and Kool-Aid, and the smoky stench of burning human waste. The future seemed inconsequential by comparison. Beautiful.
And it has been, I might add.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you go on living after what Michael Wadham said? You become, you are exposed to death. And I think a lot of what for me at least, one of the most harrowing parts of the book isn't the battle, but you're going back to LZ Loon to clean it up, to remove some of the bodies from the war zone. It just, from the battle zone, I should say, is just hard for me to imagine. And I'm going to go back and show this picture that appeared on the front cover of the New York Times. Here, if I could get this up here. Here is the New York Times from, I think it's June 23rd, 1968.
Wow.
This is 6 days after LZ Loon. And you, I believe, are in this picture carrying a body bag.
Yeah. And this was Dan's and my hole was around here. That was our 60 mortars. This flag was carried by Tom Morrissey, who was the subject of my next book. We pulled it from his pocket. He was killed there. This was a pallet of artillery ammo that was dropped because they thought they were going to be shooting artillery. It never happened. We went back, and this happened because we went back, I don't know, like 10 days later, and they just asked for volunteers to go, and we went, and they put in smoke and all this stuff so we could go in, but we had this body. We went down. We went down to get the bodies off the chopper that Mary's husband had been on, and there were 8 or 10 kids, and we had to get them off like with entrenching tools and dog tag. I mean, they were all just, it was burned. And we brought them up and we staged them with the others, the guys who've been killed on the hill, that we weren't, there were about 9 or 10 guys that we couldn't get off, and we were evacuated because, if you read the book, they were we got separated by hills. And we just happened to have a photographer, and I remember him, and he was from, like Worldwide Photos or something, and
Dana Stone.
Huh?
It was Dana Stone.
Dana Stone?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Because I got the photos.
Well, I got the photos too, but I don't know who took them.
Dana Stone and Hewitt.
Worldwide Photos.
I'll send them to you.
I got the photos. I have the originals of the photos, but and I have the original, release that came with it.
Oh, cool.
But we had to. I got a letter from my parents, like a week later, and they'd seen it in the New York Times, and they said, "This sounds." And I'd written them. They'd gotten a letter from me already about what was going on. They said, "This sounds like your group. Is this your group?" And I went, "Holy shit! I mean, this is, this is amazing." So when I got the, so here's Ken, here's a writer's insight for you. When I finished saying that it was okay to call Dan Burton a pot-smoking California surfer, I other things, I didn't have to get his, I didn't have to pay him anything for that, but I did have to pay Lou Reed and John Cale and the Velvet Underground for the opening thing I used about Valerie Solanas. And I had to pay, and we didn't know who to pay, Rick, for the photo, because it was Worldwide Photos, and the credit was all where it was. And we ended up sending $500 to AP so we could cover our ass and call it even. And I sent $500 to John Cale, $500 to Lou Reed. And
nice.
One of the highlights of my life, to send money to Lou Reed.
Yeah, Jack, did they ask how you were going to use it? The song
No,
lyrics?
they just no. It was all, it's all business with them, So it was you're dealing with their agents, and they said, okay, if it sells more than a billion copies, you have to send us another $500. And I said, we're on.
Yeah,
I'll send you 1,000 if it sells a billion copies. But and those were the only two things I had to pay royalties on.
I want to, two things before we head off here, and it is 8:57. I want to introduce or say hello to Jack Boakey, and I want everybody to know that Jack Boakey is with us. Jack is, I believe he's our senior veteran on this call. He's a Holocaust survivor. He's a Ritchie boy, meaning he escaped Nazi-occupied Holland. He made it to Europe. He was an OSS agent and then joined the U.S. Army in the United States, was trained at camp. Oh, he hates the term Ritchie boy. Jack, I'm sorry for using that term. I'm just using it so they understand who you are. Trained at Camp Ritchie, sent back overseas as a counterintelligence soldier in Europe, and tracked down Nazi war criminals. And his entire family was killed in Sobibor, I believe, a concentration camp. Jack is going to be our guest on October 25th, where he's going to be able to share his whole story.
Amazing.
Jack is a treasure. He's a treasure for the world.
God bless you, Jack.
God bless him is right.
Yeah, Semper Fi, brother. Semper Fi.
And then the other person I want to say hello to again is Henry Shepke. Henry, I know I'm going to ask you to unmute here. You said you got an interesting letter from somebody recently. You send letters out here to veterans around the world, and one was to somebody in the Indian Army.
Yeah, he was in the Indian National Army, actually. So they actually allied with the Japanese during World War II. And he's not even from India. He's from Singapore, but he fought with them during the war. And it's interesting, he actually later served with the British Army in this Singaporean army. But this is what he looks like, by the way. I got a letter from a family relative saying he unfortunately passed away in August, but they sent me like his nameplate from his uniform and a bunch of his pins that he wore during the war and afterward.
Oh, what a treasure.
Yeah, he served afterward in the Singaporean armed forces too. So,
what a treasure!
And Henry, I just want to say again, you are such an inspiration to all of us here, all of us old folks here, who we're talking to each other, and it's just so wonderful to know that somebody your age is going to hear these stories and carry on the legacy. So thank you so much for joining us. It's one thing for, I think, veterans to share these stories with each other. It's another thing for somebody like you to spend the time to listen. And that goes for Mr. Masters too, Scott Masters, Canada's greatest history teacher, who's joining us from Toronto. Thank you. I know it's a school night here, Mr. Masters, so thank you for joining us here.
It is. Thank you. It's getting late. I got to go to bed soon.
Yeah, I know. Me too. Exactly. It's way past my bedtime. So, hey, Jack McLean, and I am so honored that you joined us tonight. Rick Everington, Dan Burton, Claudia, Mary, thank you for spending so much time with us. And if you don't mind, I might ask you to come on again, just because we've heard so little of actually, LZ Loon. And I know there are a lot of stories here that we left on the table, and we'd love to pick it back up if that's possible.
Hasta luego, amigos.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. And Rick, listen, I know that you're looking for LZ Loon stories. If we could help get the word out in any way, let us know. This is what we're all about.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you again, Jack McLean. Thanks to all of you. Have a very good night.
Todd, thank you. This and everybody. What a surprise. I feel like it's been, this is your life. I mean, to have so many familiar faces here. So thank you.
Semper Fi, Jack.
Semper Fi, Jack.
Semper Fi, Dano. Semper Fi, brothers and sisters.